in this moment, what I'm really calling in to this process and to this journey that we are taking with this podcast is ease, babe. I am calling in ease. I'm inviting myself to experience ease, pleasure, a lack of tension, and flow. And the words that came to my mind, came to my heart, were that the people you make art for don't want you to suffer. In theory, I understand ease. In theory, I understand pleasure. But in practice, in my body, I'm not carrying ease. I'm not carrying pleasure. If you become your fullest expansion creatively, what could that unlock for the collective? If we all expand, expansion is contagious. Expansion is something that we are designed to give and to receive from one another. I cannot listen to an expanded person and not feel expanded. Hello, sunshine, and welcome back to Paradigm Shift with Ayandastood, a place where we reframe what is and reimagine what could be. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's paradigm shift together. Hello, divine beings and soul siblings. I am so grateful to be back with you, to be in your ears, on your speakers. It is one of my greatest joys. I am coming off of such an energetic high because on Sunday, I had my first masterclass experience where I was sharing and teaching about alchemizing and overcoming and facing creative fear and all the ways that fears come up in the creative process. And I am just so proud of myself for honoring this idea and this vision that I had and seeing it through. It was a course of maybe 5 to 6 months of interviewing about 60 of you on your experiences with fear, and then grappling with what is the best way to birth and bring this into the world in terms of the format. Creating this course with my best friend of 4 modules, and then deciding that the first module on creative fear itself was an experience in and of itself, and then committing to that and giving the experience and going through the process of trying to promote that and learning so much about some of my own gaps and my own conviction in the idea itself, which was so filled and closed by this experience. It was magical. It was divine. People brought their full presence. They were so engaged. People were so vulnerable and asked such beautiful questions. And it's so interesting because I've been thinking a lot about projection and how we project onto each other our worst fears and imaginations. And the part of this masterclass I was most afraid of, which was the questions, because I can't control them. I can't prepare for them. I was scared that someone would ask a question that I felt I was not able to answer or not ready to answer, and I would essentially fall on my face. And the projection there was essentially, these people are out to get me. That's what the fear brain is thinking, rather than the idea of the opposite of fear being love. And in it, we spoke about how the opposite of fear is also trust. So when we bring in that energy of, I trust that the people who are in this container are supporting my highest thriving, that if they come with questions, it's because they are genuinely curious. They're not trying to have me fall on my face and embarrass myself. They just want to know something. And I trust myself to be able to meet them with my fullest presence and love and wisdom. And the funniest thing, if we let life surprise us and if we awaken to the possibilities, funny enough, the part that I was most afraid of the masterclass ended up being the part that I enjoyed most. The questions, the feeling of being able to listen to people and receive them and play back what they were sharing, and also add my own thoughts on what they had provided, even visions. I feel like I kept saying the words, what I'm seeing is, and it felt like this divine mystical experience, and I enjoyed it so thoroughly, and I can't wait to bring more of you into this experience. And the course itself is going to be launching in mid-February, and I'm very excited for that experience to be on offer on demand so people can take it at their own pace. And now I don't feel this sort of tension about sharing it, because it's almost like this is just an invitation. I genuinely believe in this work, and I can't wait to have more people be a part of it. That's the energy that I'm bringing now. Whereas I feel like my big lesson in this was, I feel like I was bringing this apologetic energy. Like I was sending the email and I was like, oh, sorry, basically for having this course that I'm charging money for. And I was in this really apologetic energy. And now that I have such deep conviction conviction in what I'm doing and in the way it's received and the transformation it can offer. I just know that I'm doing something that is so rooted in my love and in my passion and in my desire to support people on their journeys, and to continue to do that both on this podcast as well as in that experience, as well as in my writing. So it's just like different areas of the ecosystem, and that people are able to access at different levels. And so it's still an ecosystem, and the vibe is the love dimension. That's what I like to call it now. It's like this idea of love being a form of consciousness that we can always invite ourselves into. What would love do next? What is the most loving thing? Are you doing this in alignment with love? And love can alchemize fear. What if instead of everyone canceling me or being against me, what if there's love here? Two of my closest friends I met through TikTok. And if I had stayed in that mindset of what about all the cancellation and the fear and the hate comments, I wouldn't have opened myself up to the possibilities of the love and the community. I just had that on my heart and I wanted to share it with you. The real focus of this episode is a word that keeps coming to me and something that I'm inviting myself into. And so therefore, I really want to invite you into as well. And this is for me related to the creative process. And yet I think it is relevant to life in general. We are always creating. We are creating habits. We are creating relationships. We are creating expectations of other people and of events. And we are so often so wrong in our expectations. We don't see all the things. And so we say, oh, this person would never want me to go up to them and say hello. That's a negative expectation we've placed, when actually maybe that person also wants to say hello to you. You know what I mean? And so how we expect our lives to go is something that we are subconsciously also creating. We're also creating, as I mentioned, ways of relating to one another, ideas that come to our minds, how we then choose to honor those ideas and bring them into life in whatever shape or form we choose. And for me, the creative process, as I think for many people, it's kind of a way of engaging with life. There's this beautiful quote by, I think it's by Sadhguru, or it's just in general, something that's said by spiritual teachers and thinkers is, in this moment, there is all of life. And I think that is so precious. I actually didn't even pause for long enough. In this moment, there is all of life. And what I see is kind of this montage, almost this everything, everywhere, all at once montage of all the things we've experienced and lived, and the contradictions and the paradoxes that we hold, and the experiences we've had, and the way that we've related to other people, and the birds are chirping, and there's air that's somehow allowing me to breathe, and I am this being with many cells inside of me that all of these things slip past my awareness. And so we tend to think that we need to go learn out there somewhere else, and yet what he says is basically that part of our path is really looking at life and not shying away from it. And in this moment, what I'm really calling in to this process and to this journey that we are taking with this podcast is ease, babe. I am calling in ease. I'm inviting myself to experience ease, pleasure, a lack of tension, and flow. And the words that came to my mind, came to my heart, were that the people you make art for don't want you to suffer. I feel like I bring all this suffering energy, you don't see it, but to my creations. I'm always like suffering for the episode. I'm suffering to edit the episode, not in a deep, huge way, like I love this, but what I mean is there is that frequency of struggle that I'm bringing. That I record the episode and then it's not good enough. I record it again. It's not good enough. I record it again. When actually, what was really the difference between the first one and the 8th one? And I don't get to the end. I get to like minute 9. It's not good enough. Again. And we spoke about this in the course, which is essentially this torturing feeling of perfectionism, of never feeling worthy enough. And what I've been thinking of with respect to perfectionism is it really is a self-worth thing. It's that we don't feel worthy of imperfect action. Like we know there's an imperfect version of the step that we're trying to take, but we don't feel worthy of it, probably from childhood, probably from how we've been valued, probably from how we've tried to make ourselves safe in the systems, the family structures, the institutions we've been a part of, have taught us that a way to try and prove our worth is through the paradigm or the experience of perfection, performance. And so now we're trying to create imperfectly and we don't feel worthy of that. So with this podcast, which I am feeling like I'm colliding with a world of possibility, a world of how I'm supposed to be manifesting in this world through this medium. And it's been really such a divine unfolding. And when I see people's feedback, it makes me feel so aligned, because it's like what they are reflecting back is exactly what I'm trying to mirror into them. What you are reflecting back to me is precisely the love and the energy and the wisdom and the vibration that I am trying to mirror into you, project into you in a positive way. There's also positive projection, right? When someone sees the absolute love in you, when someone sees the possibilities in you, when someone sees the pleasure that is possible for you. What are they doing? They're taking their view of the world, they're taking their energy, and they're projecting it into your heart. We only think of projection in the negative way. Oh, you're projecting. Don't project. And yet, if we think of the mechanism, it's like projecting what is believed to be true by the one being onto the other. So if I say to you, you are love, and love flows through you, love is unfolding for you at this moment, even if you feel deeply isolated and alone, even if you are deeply isolated and alone, love is unfolding for you. That's a projection. I see a possibility in a future and I'm sharing it onto you. So I really think this idea of good and bad, dualistic thinking, it limits us from more deeply connecting with a specific condition or trait. And if you're watching this, you saw the shoulders just dropped because we are inviting ease. So with all this struggle energy that I was bringing to these podcasts, it suddenly occurred to me that we embody the codes that we've learned from the systems that have made us. So I used to work in corporate, and that energy was really tension. It was, you will only deserve or be worthy of the release once the meeting is done, once the presentation is done, once the big scary thing is over, once the week is done, once it's Friday. And so I had this dream of the graduate school and all of this reflection that I'm meant to be a full-time creative, and went through that path, and I'm on that path now. And what I'm realizing is, what I was really realizing as I was preparing for this masterclass was, this day of creating this presentation and stuff, it doesn't necessarily feel any different from how I felt in that corporate job. But why is that? Of course, it feels different in terms of the purpose of the work, the intention, the love, the deeply personal nature of it. But the tension I'm carrying in my body, the stress I'm feeling about the event, it's like I've copy pasted, or I've brought with me all those codes of how work is meant to feel or allowed to feel. And I brought it into this space. And so what we tend to think is, oh, all I need is a different path and then I won't feel this way. The thing is, if we are seeking work that is more free, we also need to become the kind of person who can experience freedom while working. If we are seeking work that feels more meaningful and light and pleasurable, it's not going to come only from the work. You could be working on a presentation you love, but if you're bringing the energy of tension, anxiety, stress, fear, it's like your body is still implementing the codes that it's been taught. So it's like I don't love the idea of reprogramming because of the association or equation of the self and a machine or a computer, but essentially you are reteaching, relearning how to experience a different relationship to work, because we also create how we relate to work, especially creative work, which is more free. So when I thought about it in this way, that the audience of this, they don't want you to suffer. They're not sitting there like, oh, I hope Ayanda suffers today to make this presentation so that she can teach me about fear. No, they support my highest thriving. They want me to feel love. They want me to feel pleasure. They want me to feel connected to myself and to them. They want this to be an offering from a space not of stress and tension and perfectionism and anxiety, but really of love, of gentleness, of ease. And that shift for me was so powerful, and it helped me a lot in how I approached the event, where there were like little glitchy things that happened, and I just released the tension of it. Like, when your screen is sharing and you're on the wrong window, whatever, I was just like, I'm flowing. This is happening. In this moment, there is all of life. Yes, I'm making a mistake. That's life. Yes, it's not going according to plan. That's life. Yes, I am still love. Yes, I am still a vessel for love and divine creation. Yes, I am still a vessel for wisdom. Yes, wisdom still flows through me. And that is all of life. And so it was such a beautiful experience because I felt like, wow, there is a different way to relate to my creativity. So the invitation for you is really believing that you are worthy of ease, of pleasure, not only once you've created the thing, because we do this, we have our to-do lists, then we say, okay, once this is done, then I'll celebrate myself. Once I've honored this commitment, then I will feel worthy of the pleasure and the celebration and the ease. Then I'll take a break. Then I'll escape to my favorite show or book, not in a negative way. Escape literally doesn't have to be, again, we have words that we have negative associations with, but the word itself, it's just a sound. And then each of us are picturing different associations to that sound. And often this is culturally informed. So escaping, there's so much we would desire to escape in this world. So escaping to a world that an author, an artist has created for us can be a really beautiful thing. It's about receiving. I've been watching The Brother's Son on Netflix, and that's literally how it's been the most divine escape. It's been a beautiful escape. It is such a beautiful TV series. I will say it does have a lot of violence, like action fighting and stuff like that, which I usually avoid because I'm quite sensitive to, I worry how it affects my subconscious mind. This is recent. In earlier years of my life, I liked like action, not loved, but like I enjoyed those types of things. And now I actually am quite sensitive to violence. I prefer things that bring me levity or that take me away from the violent nature of reality. But I will say this show, I literally feel like I am being transported. I just sit there and I receive. And I receive the absolute genius of this show, of the creators of the show, of the actors and performers in this show. It has Michelle Yeoh. It has Justin Chien, who I didn't know, but he was an incredible actor. And Sam Lee, I think, is the other main actor. I didn't know these actors, but they are other than Michelle Yeoh. But it's incredible. It's such a good show. I love it. And something that I really believe when I'm watching a show is I give you my full presence. I surrender to what you're trying to experience. So this show, I really received the escapism of it. It felt really pleasurable and divine, and I loved it. And so what I was saying is I believe in giving shows my full presence. My phone is not visible when I watch shows. And in general, I like to have my phone right now. It's not in this room. I like to have a huge physical distance and separation between me and my phone because I feel like my phone is emitting energy and it's not an energy that for me is very supportive. So I think I would feel a bit more like tense or anxious if my phone was in the room with me now versus I'm feeling this openness, this possibility, because with the phone, there's always a possibility of reaching for the phone, of going on social media, of checking your messages. There's a lot of just this feeling of my ego self versus I want to be in my soul self. I want to be in my flow self. I want to be unencumbered by what these addictive tech companies have in store for me. And so at specific periods of the day, my phone is away from me. But essentially, I loved that feeling of escaping. But what I was saying with escape was that we've been taught this mode of work where we are working so that we can release, so that we can escape. And creativity offers this portal into a world of creating with those things that we've been taught we can only escape to, creating with ease, creating with escape. Like we can build whole worlds. I'm literally looking into a camera screen and talking. It's a form of, I'm not in my reality I'm in a portal of creation. So it's a beautiful kind of escape. There's drawing and escaping to the visual world. There's the idea of flow state, which is the notion that if you are one with the activity you are performing, whether that be an athlete playing soccer or a musician playing a piano piece or an artist drawing or a speaker speaking or a writer writing, they become one with the activity. They become completely lost in space and time. They lose track of space and time. Time both speeds up and slows down. That is flow. And isn't that a kind of escape? Because we don't get to experience flow all the time. So we're escaping the way that we usually live, which is in reality, in space, in time. What time is it? What day is it? You know what I mean? That's the paradigm that we're living in. So when we invite ourselves into ease and into flow, we're also inviting ourselves into a beautiful kind, a spiritually beautiful kind of escape. So when I thought about this notion that like the people I'm making this for, they don't want me to suffer. They want me to thrive. They are supporting my love, my pleasure, my ease. Why? Because they value me as a person, and also because they know that's going to make this whole thing sustainable. If you are carrying this tension, you can't sustain that. We burn out. We let go of projects that no longer feel like we can bring flow to them. They become unsustainable. The most sustainable thing we can do is make it easy, is make it pleasurable, and understand that there are specific invitations. I love the notion of invitations. I feel like the universe is always inviting us into things. And there are moments where we are being invited into ease, but we may just ignore that moment. We might say, no, I can't do that. This has to be stressful. I have to be hunched over my laptop editing this 50-minute episode and be stressed. But that's a limiting belief about our capacity to hold pleasure and to hold ease, because we carry the codes of the systems that made us. So it's actually takes quite a lot of learning to understand, and to experiment is another word that has come into my consciousness a lot lately. Is some of us, we struggle to make specific decisions. And in the culture, that's seen as indecisive, that's seen as a negative thing. I don't agree at all. I think when you are indecisive, which I am, it's like you see all these different possibilities and you don't know which is the right way to go, because you know that so many times what you could have sworn would be the right move actually, had other areas or aspects that you weren't anticipating, and vice versa. So now you kind of understand the wisdom of uncertainty, the wisdom of not knowing, the wisdom of being like, I think this will happen, but I can't be sure, versus the audacity, the self-righteousness of saying, if I do this, I know this will happen. When has that ever really been true? I mean, there's the intuitive knowing, and I agree with that. And also, we can all think of instances where we have been so certain that we wouldn't enjoy something, or that something would go wrong, and quite the opposite has happened, and vice versa, where we thought something would be so for us, or someone would be so for us, and unfortunately we turned out to be wrong. And also, it's not so binary, are we right, are we wrong? It's really the magic of what we discover along the way. There's this poem that my cousin read to me, and I'll find the name and put it in the show notes, that's really been stuck in my consciousness in a beautiful way. And one of the two lines that have been really resonant for me, and I literally can't remember if I brought this into the last episode or not, because it's been so front of heart for me, is, we are the mystery, we borrow the body. And I think that is so wonderful, because it's like, we are the mystery. We are this great unfolding that we have no clue what's going to happen next, what's already happening, what will unfold, what's already unfolding. And that's so wonderful to think about that in terms of like, we are the mystery. So of course, when we indecisive beings face decisions, because we are so in mystery consciousness, because we are so in uncertain consciousness in a beautiful way, we sort of are made to be unwise by the culture. Oh, you should just know what you want. Why don't you know what you want? Because of course I don't know what I want. There's so many things where we think that's exactly what I want, and it turns out that's not what we wanted, or we wanted a different version of it. So with inviting this ease into this space, it's this invitation to say, what if you get to feel the flow and the ease and the pleasure and give your love, instead of saying, oh, I need to carry this tension so that I may release it. Like we're working for the dopamine rush of the ending, of completing something and sharing it, and maybe even receiving feedback on it. But actually, what we're doing counterproductively or counterintuitively is we are carrying more tension, so that we take our tension higher, so that we can experience the drop in tension. But what we don't realize is we're still increasing to decrease. Whereas we can think to ourselves, okay, this is the code I've been taught, that in order to experience release, I have to experience tension. The idea of, oh, thank goodness it's Friday, right? That's the system we're living in. They have manipulated time such that we have these points where we feel we're worthy of the release, because we get to have a break from the things that we have to do, right? Instead of frolicking with the earth and being merry and being in community. So instead, saying to myself, you know what? Release and further release is always possible. Sometimes I do these meditations, like a yoga nidra meditation, which you can find on YouTube, and it says, relax the muscles in the eye. And have I ever just walked around thinking, oh, what if I relax the muscles in my eye? What that teaches me is there's always more levels, more deepening layers of release that are available. I don't have to carry tension to experience the pleasure of releasing it. Pleasure is actually my birthright, and pleasure is something that I can always tap into. Of course, in the construct of the world, and I think Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Maree Brown is such a guiding light on this topic, because many people think, oh no, we can't change the world if we are focusing on pleasure. And what she says is it's quite the opposite. If we center our imaginations on the notion that we are always worthy of pleasure and of community, love, connection, ease, then we embrace the energy that's actually going to sustain our movements and not make them toxic and not make them inhabitable, not make them rooted in what we don't want only, but also what we want to see. Because pleasure is really constructive, imaginatively. It's like, what do we want to create so that we can experience this feeling? And I've been revisiting this book because it's been the invitation of like, how can I actually, in theory, I understand ease. In theory, I understand pleasure. But in practice, in my body, I'm not carrying ease. I'm not carrying pleasure. I'm struggling and I'm stressing. And then when the episode is out, I'm like, oof, finally, it's gone, you know? I'm happy that I've served the world today. But why must I serve the world from that place? Can I invite myself into something different? And if we observe nature, and I'm going to read to you a few quotes from Pleasure Activism to really solidify this idea in our hearts. But if we observe nature, we see this energy of ease all the time. We see that nature, usually, unless we've done it to nature, it doesn't hold tension. There may be choppy waters, but they don't generally stay choppy. There is this feeling that there's lots of ease in nature. There's the bristling of wind. There's the bristling of the leaves in the wind. There's the cool feeling of wind against your skin. There's the sunrise easing in gradually, or the sunset easing down gradually, or the hues changing and taking place. It's not rapid. It's not stressful. It's easeful. And yes, there are these periods of sprints and release. That is something that happens, like the leopard hunting. It's hunting for food, and then it's releasing into ease and rest. So that is a pattern that we observe as well. There are many patterns to observe. The pattern that I want to study is really all the images, the feelings, the intuitive understanding of ease that nature gives us. Even our desire for sleep and rest is an example of this. That ease is our birthright, like we need it to survive. We need rest. We need release. We need a slowing down in order to really be. And the most interesting thing is our consciousness really rewards the state of rest. When we are in that state of rest, some of our most beautiful divine ideas and intuitive downloads can come to us in that space between rest and awakeness. And then there's the ease again of the ocean. Just imagine the water, the calm waters. I know there are rough waters, but there are also calm waters. And because we have this consciousness, we are the universe experiencing itself. And I believe in cosmic consciousness. I believe that the whole universe is conscious in its own way, in the way that it needs to be. Just like the idea that if you say loving words to a snowflake, it grows more intricate. That just shows me that consciousness is not just ours, right? Plants have their own kind of consciousness, their own kind of awareness. I read this incredible essay about this. And the book that it's an excerpt from, I think is called Planta Sapiens. And I'm interested in reading the book, but I haven't. But I will link to the essay. It was so divine about this notion of the consciousness that plants may have. And maybe I'll do an episode on that as well, because it was such an amazing experience reading that essay. And I've kind of forgotten it. So maybe reading it to you will allow me to remember it and put it back together again in my consciousness. So ease is really our birthright. Those slow Sundays, soft jazz or sensual music or something just soft. Candles. And we are seeing this reclamation of softness, but we also have to be careful that it's not only accessible through the paradigm of consumerism. What can we buy to experience softness? Buying things does, like a soft robe on your skin feels amazing. And also there's definitely things to be wary of, because again, it's this feeling of working really hard, hustling, so that you can experience these momentary experiences of softness. And I think softness is such a wonderful thing that a lot of people are trying to access more and more in their lives. This idea of softness, a love that is soft, a life that is soft, a home that is soft. We're seeing that a lot. And also, I think it's important that that not be fully equated with consumerism and what we're able to buy and access and purchase. That for all of us on earth, softness is our birthright. Softness is an experience that we can tap into. Connecting to the ocean, I can feel the ocean within me. But of course, as long as the systems we live in are stressing us out, and as long as there is just mass suffering in the world, it becomes that much more impossible to access softness, and also maybe even something to question. So anyway, softness is an invitation that is also possible within the creative process. I wanted to close by reading you these beautiful quotes by Adrienne Maree Brown that I think are just so precious and really ground us in this notion that pleasure is our birthright. Pleasure actually fortifies our dreams for a different world, our dreams for a more loving world, our dreams for a decolonized world. And also, ease and love, connection and community are so connected to and intertwining with pleasure. So let me read you those quotes right now. She says, "Pleasure is not one of the spoils of capitalism. It is what our bodies, our human systems are structured for. It is the aliveness and awakening, the gratitude and humility, the joy and celebration of being miraculous." Woof! Did you receive? So it's saying that it's not one of the spoils of capitalism, as in one of the things that capitalism affords us only in a privileged way, but rather it's what we're really wired for. Like if you think of why can we experience, if someone touches our skin, we feel this electricity. Why can we experience orgasm? Why can we experience pleasure, laughter? Like we are wired for this feeling of aliveness, for this feeling of glee and bliss. It is our birthright. And it's the systems and structures that have made it more and more inaccessible and more unequal, just as there's income and socioeconomic inequality, that then also creates an inequality in terms of how much we feel we are able to access these things. And I love how she ends, the joy and celebration of being miraculous. That is so wonderful because it's not outside of us. It's not something that we are doing. We are already a miracle. We are already magic. We are already, literally, it was almost impossible, a 1 in 400 trillion chance of us being here. And then we have these complex body systems that we don't even fully understand and yet that are supporting us. And we have people that we're able to connect with. We have frequencies that we're able to tap into. We in and of ourselves, our brains are wired for language, so we are meant to speak to one another and to communicate with one another. We're wired for connection. We're wired for love. We're wired for seeing and being seen. And so that's why it's so deeply painful when we lack these things, when we feel that loneliness, that soul level loneliness of not having the conversations, the connections, the community that we seek, desire, and need, of being isolated, right? So pleasure is our birthright because always in this moment there is the joy and the celebration of being miraculous. And when I think about the tension that I hold while I'm creating these episodes and then while I'm editing them really, and especially in the editing process, there's a lot of self-criticism. And we were speaking about this in the masterclass where someone was sharing that it's very difficult to face yourself while you're editing and to see yourself struggling. She was sharing a story of saying the same line again and again and again. And it was this beautiful connection because I feel the same way. I feel like facing myself in editing, all the self-criticism and the shame comes up and the blame and all of it comes up. And I have a note on my phone, which I've shared on my TikTok, that's essentially, you are not shameful. And it's a reminder to myself. I just open it up to say, thank you. I received this message. I'm not shameful. Okay. So this quote that I'm going to read next is kind of an invitation into this relationship to ourselves. She says, ultimately, love for the self is the deepest pleasure we deny ourselves. Isn't that so interesting? Love for the self is the deepest pleasure we deny ourselves. We don't allow ourselves to fully access. And yet it's the deepest pleasure, she says. She says, I work daily to be courageous enough to indulge in the purest pleasure of self-love. What's this interesting juxtaposition that's forming in our minds? We don't usually view it as courageous to indulge in pleasure. And we don't usually view it as the deepest pleasure to love ourselves. So there's a lot of reconditioning, reinvitation that's happening here. Because it does in this world that's constructed in this toxic, masculine, Western imagination. But essentially, that because we've learned these codes from these systems, it actually takes courage to go against that superstructure in our bodies and allow ourselves, invite ourselves into saying, what would be the most pleasurable thing for me to do next? And we also do this with information. We stuff our brains with more and more information. So we listen to all this information, and sometimes our bodies actually just want silence. They just want the pleasure of resting in a moment of silence. And I know that sometimes that can be very anxiety inducing. But if we think about our hunter-gatherer selves, there was so much silence. There was also community and singing and togetherness. So I'm not saying silence alone. In fact, many of us are terrified of silence because then we have to confront the deep loneliness we feel. So there's a difference between solitude, as they say, which is this kind of nourishing form of company with oneself, versus loneliness, which is the mental health threatening, life threatening, and social fabric threatening form of isolation. This feeling of a deep panging in our hearts for company. And not just anyone's company, but someone who's going to speak to our deepest selves and hold our deepest selves. And that is such a unfathomable notion for so many on earth and so many of you listening to this. And my affirmation is just that love is unfolding for you. Community is unfolding for you. I affirm that, and I'm manifesting that from me to you. The last quote I want to read from this book really gives you an overview of like why she wrote this book and why pleasure and activism combine. Because again, there's a surprise there, right? We don't usually associate activism with pleasure. Activism is about fighting. Activism is about struggling. We call it the struggle. Activism is about pushing, fighting systems, breaking systems, tearing down systems. So how do you get pleasure and activism together? It's this beautiful combination of usually unrelated ideas, because we often associate pleasure with something that's frivolous, something that's extra, something that we may get to experience once or if or when, not now. Pleasure is rarely now. And pleasure is rarely seen as something that can coexist and even be conducive to the process of activism. So let's read her intention, because I think that will really ground us in this work, and hope that you receive the full download. And I really invite you to read this book. It's quite beautiful. Adrienne Maree Brown says, my intentions for readers of this book are that you recognize that pleasure is a measure of freedom. Pleasure is a measure of freedom. And when I hear those words, I also think about how much shame we carry in our bodies, such that pleasure becomes very challenging to access fully. And so that shame lives in the body, and that shame blocks the fullest experience of pleasure. So that's why I love this idea that our pleasure is a measure of our freedom. Notice what makes you feel good and what you are curious about. Have you done that? Have you noticed when you are in pleasure? You could keep a note on your phone. Things that feel good, moments that feel good. And I think you'll find a beautiful collection of stories from that. Learn ways you can increase the amount of feeling good time in your life to have abundant pleasure. Decrease any internal or projected shame or scarcity thinking around the pursuit of pleasure, quieting any voices of trauma that keep you from your full, sacred, sensual life. Create more room for joy. That's what I'm trying to do in this episode. I just want to feel the joy. I want to feel like the feeling I'm getting is like, I've never done this, but I really feel called to it, like hands on clay. like the sensual feeling of your hands in clay. I don't know. There's something very sensual and grounded and joyful about that to me. Also, the notion that I'm just one with this clay. I want to really try that. I want to go to like a ceramics class one day, manifesting that. Create more room for joy, wholeness, and aliveness. I have that whole episode on aliveness. And less room for oppression, repression, self-denial, and unnecessary suffering. I think that's been the whole invitation. Because we know suffering exists, but there's also unnecessary suffering. And that's often the suffering we say, oh, I have to suffer in order for this relationship to work. I have to suffer in order for this friendship to work. I have to suffer in order for this creativity to work. So we bring these codes again from these systems into all of these areas of our lives until we realize, wait, why am I suffering? This is exactly what happened to me in my last relationship, where he's polyamorous and I was trying to invite myself into a new way of relating. I'm not polyamorous. So I was suffering unnecessarily to fit into what he needed. And eventually I was just like, what am I doing? This is not my, I love and respect and hold so much space for people who are reimagining love and possession and desire. And also, theory cannot police feeling. I'm not sure who said that, but it's a banging quote. You have to trust how things feel in your body. So I think there's also this hierarchical structure that's developed where now it's almost seen as though, because it goes against the paradigm that we exist in, some people view polyamory as like a higher form of love. But I think wherever there's hierarchy, there's going to be suffering. And that in my romantic longing episode, we speak about this from Bell Hooks, where she says that like love cannot exist where there is domination, in All About Love as well as in Communion. So similarly, if you are in a relationship with someone who thinks their form of loving is superior to yours, love cannot thrive there. Like if we think about love and we think about the earth and all the different species on earth, the little animals, the insects, the little things in the soil that replenish the nutrients of the soil. We think of the flowers, we think of the red flowers, the pink flowers, the orange flowers. We think of all the variety. That's how I believe love is. There are so many abundant forms of love. And there's so many different manifestations of love. And so we can never say, my love is better than yours, if the real process of that is love. So we're not talking about toxic love, because in Bell Hooks' world, that's just not love. So we're talking about truly like love, 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 love makes the world go round. That cannot be placed on a hierarchical structure. So love between friends is just as valid as love between lover and lover. A truly loving bond between parents and child, between adopted parents and child, between, if it's truly love, it's love. There's no more legitimate parent, or there's no more, it's love flowing. And we need that love to flow and to open ourselves as vessels, not only for giving love, but for receiving it. And also doing that and practicing and experimenting with ourselves. What would make me feel more loved right now? So for me, I feel really loved when I give myself this space to speak from this energetic state of being and really allow myself to be embodying what I'm saying, rather than creating this perfect plan for the episode and reading and feeling really stuck and contracted. For me, love feels expansive. Yesterday, I called someone who I'm going to see next week, but I had to hear her voice. I was like, I just miss you so much. I can't wait to see you. And we spoke for like 5 seconds, and it was a beautiful 5 seconds. So I let love flow through me. I didn't know she was going to answer. And of course, I had access to being able to call her. Love can be like, wow, the bird just chirped. It wants me to acknowledge it. It's almost like, you know how when you perform, you're like making an accent for your friends. You want them to be like, ha ha ha. So maybe the bird wants that too. They want to be acknowledged, like, yes, bird, go off. Okay, make your sounds. I hear you. So I love that so much, making more room for joy, wholeness, and aliveness. And I love that idea of room. Like, is there literally room? Is there space? Are you creating space for these things? And then creating less room for oppression, repression, self-denial, and unnecessary suffering. She's not saying your oppression is your fault, and if you're feeling no, not at all. But sometimes, because we've been so conditioned, we hold it in our bodies, we hold it in our beings, we hold it in our states of thinking and expectations, and then we create a lot of room for it to keep and to persist within us. So also, we're also on both sides, right? So if we're creating room for oppression, that's also things like the way we treat and regard others. Self-denial is such a powerful point. Like, what are you denying yourself of at this moment? Sometimes we deny celebrating ourselves while trying. We say, I'll only be worthy of celebrating what I'm doing once it's worked, once I know that I'm on the right path, once I can see my quote unquote success. That is self-denial. Instead of saying, whoa, I wrote a line today. Like, that's incredible. Let me go celebrate that. What are we denying ourselves from accessing? Sometimes when we don't look at each other in the eyes because it's uncomfortable, we avert each other's eyes as we walk around. We're denying ourselves of the pleasure of connection and the possibility of a pleasurable connection. Because sometimes you just have these random moments with strangers that are so delightful and random. And because we're living in many people more and more atomized ways, that becomes a form of denial, but then we carry that code within us. When we've been isolated, we carry isolation. So we move around, we're on our phones, we're afraid of looking up and looking out because of the risk. Because it's always a risk to love. It's always a risk to relate. It's always a risk. We don't know what the other will do. We don't know how we will be received. But there's the invitation. We don't know how we will be received. So in what way do you deny yourself of pleasure? We also do this with food, which could be a whole episode, but essentially this idea that you'll be worthy of pleasurable food once this or that has happened. And the whole diet culture paradigm exists through this lens of self-denial, repression of desire, and all these things. And then so many phobias and forms of oppression live through this paradigm as well, where we deny ourselves access to a kind of love that maybe we were not taught was meant for us. And that's this notion of heteronormativity as well, where you're conditioned to believe this is the love that is meant for me. And then the unnecessary suffering, holding that word unnecessary. And in our creativity, it almost is always unnecessary that we suffer. Like, who is telling us to finish these drawings, I must suffer? And the invitation then becomes, because obviously everything coheres in a way, like I don't want to blame us for suffering. Why are we feeling like we must suffer? Like, just ask myself, okay, my darling, you're struggling. Like, while I'm editing, what is making you feel like that's your only option at this moment? What would make you feel more pleasure in this moment? What would make you feel more ease? And I did this journaling exercise where I said, you know what? I'm going to adopt the mindset of an editor who is not me. And I'm going to say my only role as an editor, is to make this person thrive and look good. I don't mean in the physical sense, but I mean in their ideas. My only goal is to support her. Look at her. She's trying to spread love. She's trying to spread wisdom. I support her. I've got her. And I was able to relate to myself in a different way as I was editing that episode and getting it, finishing it and trying to finish it in a way that felt pleasurable. And then she says, identify strategies beyond denial or repression for navigating pleasure in relationship to others. And begin, that's the whole thing I was mentioning. I used the paradigm of heteronormativity as an example. And begin to understand, the other thing is, for an example, friends shouldn't hold each other like this. That's a perfect example of the denial and repression of our birthright capacity to experience pleasure. When we say, friends shouldn't cuddle like this, like, that's not right. Who taught us that? So this imagination, this colonial imagination, and this imagination that's rooted in policing love rather than letting love bloom and letting love expand, it's a way of repressing and denying it. It's a way of saying, I kind of want to reach for my friend's hand right now, but I'm not going to because that's not allowed. So in what ways do you repress your expression of pleasure and love in this world? And then finally, begin to understand the liberation possible when we collectively orient around pleasure and longing. Now, that is so powerful when we collectively orient around pleasure and longing, because what does that open a portal into? If we collectively are rooted in what we long for, we start to have different conversations. We start to say, okay, wow, I really long for community. I long for a space where we can come together, talk, dance, create. Maybe a space where there's more facilitated conversation around a specific area of our lives. I long for a space where we can create with each other, where we can come together and there's just paint on the floor and there's paint and there's paper and we're just making things together. I long for a space where we can sing together. We just come together. Someone starts singing a song that they think most of us will know, and we all just sing together. No karaoke, no technology, just us and our voices in this ancient practice of singing that we've done for centuries and centuries and centuries. I long for more time to be with the people that matter to me. So there's this reimagination of how can we orient ourselves to time. I long for a world where Black people are safe and celebrated, where queer people are safe and celebrated, where all of us who now carry the identity of in some way marginalized become these vessels of pleasure and of ease and of softness, that in the next world we are the softness keepers, we are the love keepers, we are the community keepers, right? We're not embodying this representation of what's been projected onto us, which is that we are to be feared, to be diminished, to be ridiculed. Instead, we are living as divine beings among other divine beings. I long for spaces where we can receive spiritual education in person, in community, that reconnects us with ancient spiritualities, the same spiritualities that the colonizer came and called savage and tried to impose their own way of seeing and believing onto us. I long for spaces where we can come together and learn from each other's cultures. So what do you hear is happening? We are orienting our work together, our imagination together around our longing and our pleasure, what we seek to feel rather than what we don't want to see anymore. Both are needed, but we can even feel how we kind of feel this energy of like ascending or something. Or I don't know how to describe it, tingling, even deepening. Everyone experiences things differently. A softness starts to form, an image starts to form of, wow, wouldn't that be so amazing? A world where indigenous belief systems and practices are celebrated in their multiple forms, are venerated. A world where we are deeply rooted in earth consciousness and connection to the earth and connection to ourselves as earth. And where we are stewards of the earth rather than exploiters and extractors of the earth. And she says that a bonus of this book and her intention for it is that we realize that we, the readers, are pleasure activists. And I feel the pleasure of embodying her wish through this episode, which is that we find a way to become pleasure activists, to seed our longing for the future in pleasure, in soil of pleasure, in soil of love. I know the word soil brings up, it's kind of one of those words, but it's crucial as a life force, as just, it's so wise and intelligent, and it is what allows us to be and to eat and to experience and to be nourished. But if we're planting liberating seeds in soils of toxicity, of punishment, of self-denial, as she says, of furthering our own oppression and each other's. And this is what we see, what she's coming from is in some of these spaces that are meant to be about movement and collective healing, we find the same punitive practices. We find the same practices of othering, of forming groups and hierarchies. So we carry the codes. So we have to understand that pleasure is an invitation to break this code and to form a new code. So I'm feeling complete. I'm feeling like in this episode, I really embodied the message that I was sharing, which is that ease is always possible. Pleasure is always possible. Love can flow through us much more easily if we choose to channel that love through the notion that we are worthy of ease. We are worthy of pleasure. We don't only get to celebrate ourselves once the job is done. We don't need to reduce our creativity into the same structures and paradigms and rigidity that we've been given and taught through systems that ranked us against one another, graded us, told us we were good or bad students, and then work structures where there are hierarchies and there are outcomes and goals and there are ways that our emotions are then made to be repressed in those environments. So I wanted to leave you with a couple of questions. I know I've asked some questions, but just more in case you want to go deeper. My first big question for you, my darling, is how could it be easier? How could it be easier? How could it be more easy? If you have a vision and you're working towards that vision, but you're struggling, just the perspective, look, zoom out and look at it from the universe's perspective and say, if the universe is infinite, there are infinite possibilities, not only for the outcome, but for the process. So how could it be easier? Number two, if you're listening to this, I know that on a theoretical level, you believe you are worthy of love, of ease, of pleasure. But now I want to ask you, my love, are you embodying that knowledge? Are you theorizing it or are you embodying it? If you believe you're worthy of rest, are you still pushing past your limits? And I know some of this, again, it's unnecessary suffering versus if your boss or someone in your life is making you do that. But are you embodying the wisdom of ease? The wisdom of pleasure? Is it flowing through you, like pulsating through your pores into all the things you touch? That beautiful Octavia Butler quote, all that you touch, you change. And all that you change, changes you. And the next question I want to ask is, because we're talking about self-pleasure and experiencing pleasure through creation, how can we be stewards or activists of pleasure for those in our lives? How can we bring this energy of ease and pleasure and flow into the spaces that we're in? So for example, in my masterclass, there was someone who said, I was speaking really about an outcome-based approach to creativity where you're really working towards something. And they just reminded us that it's also about finding the enjoyment of the process itself, finding the pleasure of the process itself. And this is an idea that I believe in so strongly, but I realized after that presentation that it was one of those things where theoretically I believe it, but embodiment and in practice, that's not the message necessarily I was sharing. Because I was trying to be conscious of the fact that people do have goals that they are working towards. We're always holding the paradox of finding the flow and the ease. And also there are things that we feel, wouldn't that be nice? There are futures we're envisioning, realities we're envisioning where we are working towards them. And also that invitation was bringing us back to the joy of the creative process as it is and finding that joy. So this is your invitation. This is your sign from the universe. The shift that I'm inviting you into is from tension, struggle, unnecessary suffering in our creativity especially, and in our relationships, which are a dimension or manifestation of creativity and vice versa. As in, relationships are spaces for creativity and creativity is a space for relationship. Because in the realm of creativity, we can assess all the things we're actually relating to, not just other people, but also how we relate to our art is a creative choice that we often make subconsciously because we've been taught a certain approach of you must suffer so that it can be its best work, so that you can do great work, you must suffer. And we're trying to unlearn that and seed a new type of being and creating and relating. And then also in the paradigm of relationship, there's always the option of being more creative, of coming up with language, of coming up with systems and little invitations in the relationship to really nurture the most thriving relationship that can be. Sometimes we take the rules for relationships for granted. We say, oh, this is what I love that I have learned from polyamory is just relationship design and being much more thoughtful about co-constructing and co-designing a relationship rather than letting social conditioning determine your relationships. So that was the third question. Okay, so how can it be easier? Which you can always ask yourself. If you're in a moment of struggle, how can it be easier? How can I find the release without needing to take on the tension? Number 2, are you embodying the wisdom of ease, even as you know in theory that you are worthy of it? And number 3 is, how can we become spaces of ease and of pleasure in the people in our lives? Can we be a reminder to them? Oh, baby, you're sounding really stressed and anxious. Is there a way we can make this easier? Oh, my love, did you know that you're so worthy of ease? And so if you're really suffering to make this, maybe it's an invitation that it's a time to either take a different approach or just take some rest and stillness. Oh, my love, did you know that we're really seasonal beings? So if you're feeling like you are not creating or you are not living up to these goals and dreams that the new year has really imposed on you or invited you into, that it actually is so natural. And let's find the flow and the ease with our oneness with the earth. And so when we hear our friends and the people in our lives stuck in this position of like, I have to earn pleasure, I'm not worthy of pleasure, I'm not worthy of ease, can we be the voices, can we be the pleasure activists that invite them into more ease and into more flow? I'm so grateful that I was able to share space and time with you today in this portal, in this offering, in this invitation. I'm wishing you ease. I'm wishing you the invitation that pleasure is possible, and that through pleasure we can seed our imagination for what we want to see, what we want to believe, what we want to create together. I'm sending all my love, and I'm also affirming that you never want me to suffer in the creation of these episodes. And that has been such a wonderful shift, and I've only been able to come to that realization through the love that you've all shown me. And through that love and through that reception and that energy you vibrated back to me, it's like developing this trust that I am held, I'm supported. We are trying to feed into each other, to feed love into each other, to feed nurturing into each other, and to pave a different path. So in doing that, it's not only about getting the episode out and then being able to, it's also about the whole end-to-end process, trying to find as much flow, as much pleasure, as much ease as the process will allow. I know there are spaces where ease and pleasure are not accessible to us, and so I want to affirm that again, this is about the moments where we are embracing an unnecessary form of suffering. I love you so dearly. I hope to see you again very soon. I'm sending you my deepest love, gratitude, and my deepest ease. Let it be easy, babe. Let's be napping. Let's be resting. Let's be flowing with the universe. And let's also be inviting moments of silence. Sound bath music is something that really supports me in getting me into that frequency of calm, of release, of ease. Because we can tap into the body to experience what we are trying to experience. So if we want to experience more ease, placing the body in an easeful position, whether that's lying in that like Shavasana pose, listening to an audiobook or a sound bath, receiving, that just brings ease. Some of my best ideas come in that state. Or whether it's just, I sat before this episode in silence and I just allowed myself, instead of rushing into recording it and then recording it again and recording it again and recording it again, just say, what if you were not ready to record? What if you need that time to let the water of your being and love and consciousness really just seep in and settle? Thank you to the birds chirping. I acknowledge you. I love you. We are one. And another thing that I always want you to consider is, if you become your fullest expansion creatively, what could that unlock for the collective? If we all expand, expansion is contagious. Expansion is something that we are designed to give and to receive from one another. I cannot listen to an expanded person and not feel expanded. I cannot listen to a movie that is expansive, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, or the show The Brother's Son, or any of the movies that I've loved or shows that I've loved, and not feel expanded. That is the nature of art. Art that is expansive will expand. And the artist that is expansive and expanding will create expansive art. So sometimes we're so focused on our own ego protection, but when we shift into a service mindset, then we think, okay, if I release, I spoke to someone on my call who's releasing this service of energetic healing, and she was expressing fear. And it's like, but if I release this, who could I then heal energetically? Who could then touch other people? Who could then touch other people? All that we touch, we change. So it's just this incredible domino effect. And so what is going to be our role? What are we willing to expand into for the sake of collective healing, collective imagination, collective pleasure, and collective ease? I love you so dearly. I'll see you next week. Bye. I hope some paradigms have been shifted for you in today's conversation. As always, if you can, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Like, comment, subscribe. I love you so, so much. Okay? I love you. Join me on my Substack. Links in the comment section. Go there. Okay? Love you so much. Love you. Bye.